Well, hi! How you doing? Since like 2017, I've gotten a whole lot of requests to do a sort of modular cribs video where I just show you my modular rack, tell you the modules that I have, why I have them. But the problem is that for most of that time, my modular rack was always evolving and changing in some way. Not so much lately, though. I think the last time I put a new module in this modular synthesizer was about 6 months ago, and I don't see it changing drastically anytime soon. So now is the perfect time to finally make that video. As for the overall modular synthesizer, it has 6 rows, and then down here conveniently out of the camera frame, there is a place for me to put my elbows, which is really nice because I have a really freakishly long reach. Some people have asked me its name, and I think it's weird when people name inanimate objects a name that is a gender that they date or would marry. Check out Priscilla here, my lady of the night. But yeah, I haven't named my modular synthesizer, but I can. I'll name it now. How about Jim, Jimmy, Jimmy John, Quizno, Subway, Subway, meet Subway. It's not very entertaining for me to just stand here and point to things and be like, this oscillator has a square wave and a saw wave and a sync input. You clicked on this clickbaity title for a reason, and there is no bait. I intend on giving you a warm meal. What you are viewing is click dinner, my friend. So here's what we're gonna do. One by one, we're gonna go through every single one of these modules in my rack, and I'm gonna tell you 4 things. 1, what it does. 2, what I personally use it for. 3, how often I use it, graded by percentage of overall patches. Finally, number 4, if I would trade it for a module of equal value right here and now. Or alternatively, if this studio burned to cinders tomorrow, if I would buy it again. Ooh, just glancing over real quick, I feel like this video might get a bit brutal. The reason I'm doing this is that if you are somebody who wants to build a modular synthesizer or expand a modular synthesizer, maybe this will help you make some of those decisions. Also worth mentioning, I would hedge my bets that most people who own a reasonably large modular setup are not thrilled with a third to half of the modules in their setup. And I don't think that that is an issue with the actual module quality. I think that that's an issue with workflow. So keep in mind that if I say that I don't use a module very often, or if I say that I would trade it, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad module. Most of the modules that I think were bad that I've owned over the years are obviously no longer in my modular rack. However, there are a couple in there that I do think are bad, and they're just taking up space at the moment. And I think the ones that I think are bad will surprise you. This is a Behringer Neutron semi-modular synthesizer with a very angsty sticker on it. To be totally honest, I rarely use it in this case, and it's just kind of taking up space until I need new modules in which it will return to its semi-modular case, but I do like the synthesizer. I use the Neutron in about 15% of my patches, and I do not think that I would trade it for something of equal value due to it being so cheap. This is a Kilpatrick audio pattern generator with the MIDI in and out DLC, and it generally just creates patterns out of what you visually see on the screen. I pretty quickly got bored of its intended function, and now I just use it as a clock generator. I use it in about 20% of my patches. And yes, as of right now, I would trade it for something of equal value. This is Rample. It is a 4-channel sampler that stores and reads samples from a micro SD card. It has a bunch of nifty features like freeze and allowing you to randomize samples and things like that on the same channel. I use the Rample in about 30% of my patches, and I don't think that I would trade it for something of equal value right now. To the right there, you'll see the Polyend Poly, which is actually not powered, but that's because I have the Poly 2, which you will see in a moment. This is the Pittsburgh Modular Lifeform semi-modular synthesizer, and despite this being one of the early units and not being able to calibrate perfectly, I do like it more than any other semi-modular synthesizer that I own. I would say that I use it in about 50% of my patches, and I probably would trade it for something of equal value simply because I've used it so much that I kind of want to try something new. This is the Quantimator, which is a 3-channel quantizer with sample and hold and chord function and all sorts of things like that. I would say that I only use it in less than 10% of my patches because I have to look up what these letters and numbers mean to figure out what scale I'm using. I probably would trade it for something of equal value. By the way, that BAM module to the left of it is a buffered mult, and I'm not really going to go into all of this with utility modules because they're pretty interchangeable and they're used in pretty much every patch. This is the 4MS stereo triggered sampler. It has a recording function and it can operate as 2 separate samplers or 1 stereo sampler. I don't use the record function as much as I should. I probably only use it in 30% of my patches, and I probably would trade it for something of equal value. Next to that is the 4MS stereo multiband resonator, and man, this module is really crazy. I've spent an enormous amount of time playing with this module and trying to figure out how to use it, but I can only seem to get this same sort of ice cream trucky sound out of it. There's no possible way I could describe what it does in a video like this, so definitely check out a different review of it. I would say I use it in 20% of my patches, and at this point, I probably would trade it for something of equal value. This is the Qbit Cord, and it has 4 oscillators and 5 outputs. The 5th output is a mixture of the 4 oscillators stacked together, creating chords. I'm personally not that crazy about it just because it's such a weird path to make melodies, but I do actually use it in the background of quite a bit of my patches. I'd say maybe 40 to 50%, and I probably would trade it for something else of equal value. The Tiptop Quantizer is a fully featured single output quantizer that has a couple unique things, such as this slider here. I would say that I use it in about 50% of my patches, and I would not trade it for something of equal value. The Mutable Braids is an old school multi-function module that has a whole lot of oscillators, and it has its own VCAs, and it's almost a standalone device. I personally love it, and I use it in about 60% of my patches, and if it wasn't for Mutable Plates, I would probably have bought another one already. On your left is just a simple input-output with a headphone port, and to the right of that is the Polyend Poly 2. I use the Poly 2 as my main way of getting MIDI or USB into CV or gate, so I would say that I use it in about 80% of my patches, and I would not trade it for something of equal value. To the right of that is a Dopefur A166 Logic module, which is a bunch of logic gates and inverters. And then to the right of that is an A152 address TNH switch. I can't really explain what these modules do in a video where I am going through things this quickly, but I would say that I use them in about 50% of my patches, and I would not trade them for something of equal value. This is Mutable Elements, which is an incredibly powerful physical modeling module, and you can make anything from cello sounds to mallet sounds to flute sounds to just crazy sound design. I use it all the time, maybe 70% of my patches, and I would not trade it for something of equal value. This is the ED114, which is just a very simple AD or AR envelope generator, and it also functions as a pulse delayer. I would say I use it in about 40% of my patches, and I would not trade it for something of equal value. If you can't tell by now, I am a big fanboy of the old school mutable stuff, and this is Rings, which is a resonator, but it's also a Car Plus Strong string generator, basically a physical modeler for bells and strings, and it is absolutely gorgeous. I've used it in tons of my released music. I would say that I use it in about 30% of my patches, and I would love to use it more, but it's such a unique sound. With it being one of my favorite modules, I would not trade it for the world. If you go all the way back to the first video I ever made on this channel, it was about this module, or semi-modular synthesizer, depending on what kind of case you want to put it in, the Moog Mother 32. It has your classic Moog sounding oscillator and filter, and is probably a huge gateway to modular for a lot of people. I'd say that these days I use it in about 25% of my patches, and I think I probably would trade it for something of equal value. Just below that, we have the Moog Drummer from Another Mother, which is another module that I have featured pretty extensively on this channel if you look back and want to learn more about it. But I just don't see it as a good drum machine. I see it as a really awesome oscillator and sequencer source. I would say that I use it in about 50% of my patches, and I would not trade it for something of equal value. To your right, you have Mutable Links, which is just a bunch of buffered mults. The larger black module in the middle is the Qbit Nebula, which is unfortunately not outputting audio right now, and I'm not sure why. I think my patches may be corrupted or something, and I'm not really all that happy with the module even when it does work. I probably use it in 5% of my patches, and I would absolutely trade it for something of equal value. This is the Expert Sleeper's Disting Mark IV. The purpose of this module is to do as many things as possible while using as little space as possible. Unfortunately, when you pack all of this into something this small, the user interface suffers, and because of that, I don't think I've ever used it in a patch. I'm not sure if I ever will, so I think I would trade it for something of equal value. This is the Control Forge, which is probably the most powerful and versatile digital voltage generator available. I usually use it for envelopes, but it is a very, very complex module, and if you want to learn more about it, check out my video on it. I would say that I use it in maybe 30% of my patches, and I suppose I would trade it for something of equal value. This is IntelliGel Plonk, which is a percussive sound modeler, and I bought it because there's a lot of hype around it. However, for me, this module just never works. I'll either get an error on the screen, or it just won't output audio, or as you see right now, it just shut itself off and requires me to reboot the whole rack. Obviously, for this reason, I've never been able to use it beyond testing, so I would absolutely trade it for something of equal value. This is Ornament Crime, which is a very ambitious and open source project, and I had built this module myself a few years ago. If what you are seeing on the screen is intimidating, then you are probably right, because this is one of the most complex and avant-garde modules ever made. I actually have two of these, and I use them to make almost artificially intelligent generative melodies. I would say I use them in about 50% of my patches, and I would not trade them for something of equal value. The main idea behind the Polyend preset is to create presets for a bunch of different modules and then either sequence them or morph them together. And I personally think it's a brilliant module. I would say that I use it about 50 to 60% of the time, and I would not sell it for something of equal value. If you want to know more specifically about how it works or hear a demo, then definitely check out my video on it on this channel. On the left side of the rack here, you will see two Expert Sleepers modules. The ES6 is a CV light pipe interface, and the ES8 is a fully featured audio interface. These modules are very highly rated and popular, but for me, they have just never really blended with my workflow all that well, and so I never really use them. This is the infamous Mutable Clouds module. That is a texture synthesizer that a lot of people also use as end-of-chain effects. You can load open source alternative firmware on it, and I tried to modify my own. It didn't work out so well, so it's just waiting for me to have some time to put some workable firmware back on it. This is Mutable Warps, which is almost kind of like a multi-effects comprised of wave folders and vocoders and ring modulators and things like that. It even has an alternative oscillator in case you don't want to plug in two inputs. I would say I use it in about 25% of my patches, and I do not think I would trade it for something of equal value simply because there's alternative firmware for this as well. The small silver module to the right of that is the ANA module Tiktok, which is a clock divider and multiplier, and I would say that I probably use that in 90% of my patches, and it's safe to say that I would not trade it for anything. So to our left, we have a Dopefur A-111-4 quad oscillator module. You could sync or tune or detune these oscillators to make really original, powerful sounding oscillators, or you could even use them individually with something like the Polyend Poly 2 to play chords from a keyboard, or even something like the Ornament Crime to make crazy generative melodies. I would say that I use this module in about 75% of my patches, and I'm actually on the fence regarding buying another one or just buying another module that has similar features. Next to that, we have the A1431 complex envelope generator / LFO. If you use this module as a bridge between the quad oscillator and a quad VCA module, then you have polyphonic modular patches. But these envelopes are also loopable, and they could trigger one another and play with one another. It's really powerful. I would say that I use it in maybe 60% of my patches, and I would not trade it for something of equal value. This is Maths. It is one of the most popular modules in the world, and it is one of the modules that made me get into modular in the first place. Maths is a crazy loopable, cyclable, patchable, dual envelope generator that can also generate gate sequences, that can also generate oscillators. This is one module that I've just not seen emulated or cloned in any way, and I've owned it for about 5 years now, and I'm still finding new things to do with it all the time. I would say that I use it in 90% of my patches, and I would not trade it for anything. And we could hook this up to an old school Pittsburgh modular filter. To me, the filter sounds really rich without the resonance ever getting really overbearing. It's pretty much just your meat and potatoes filter, and I probably use it in 70 to 80% of my patches, and I would not trade it for something of equal value. The black module on your left is a bubble sound quad VCA. It does its job just fine. I probably use it in 60% of my patches, and I would not trade it for something of equal value. The IntelliGel Mu Scale is a dual channel quantizer, and to be honest, I don't think I've ever actually looked into the advanced functions of it. I've pretty much only used it as a single channel quantizer, and it's worked just fine for me. I would say I use it in 50% of my patches, and I would probably explore its advanced features before trading it for something of equal value. The small Mutable Kinks module is a utility module that's just a wave rectifier, a sample and hold, and a logic gate. The large module on the right is the Sputnik Modular West Coast Random Source, and it is basically the super Walmart of random. It has quantized and stored random voltages, it has multiple sample and hold outputs, and it just has noise sources. Since so many of the patches I make are generative, I would say that I use this in 80% of my patches, and I would not trade it for something of equal value. To the right of that, we have a small lattice buffered mult, and on the end there, we have the Snazzy Effects Ardcore. Ardcore is an Arduino with some high-quality inputs and outputs and knobs, and it is fully programmable. I think I only use the Ardcore in maybe 5% of my patches, but when I do use it, it's for extremely specialized uses, so I do not think that I would trade it for something of equal value. This module on the right that I'm conveniently covering with my phone has not been released yet, so I can't really talk about it here, but it is amazing, and it is coming out very soon. To the left of that, in the white, we have a smaller and more efficient build of Ornament Crime that is running an alternative firmware called Hemisphere. Just like the other Ornament Crime, it is a deep rabbit hole that I could not possibly cover in this video. I probably use it in 60% of my patches, and I would not trade it for something of equal value. To the left of that, we have the Mutable Plates, or Plates, which is the supposed successor to braids. It beautifully merges the hands-on interface of modular with digital oscillators, and I would say that I use it in 40% of my patches, and I would not trade it for something of equal value. And to the left, we have a black build of Clouds, which again is a texture synthesizer that a lot of people use as end-of-chain effects. There's so much fun spectral and glitchy experimentation that can be done with Clouds, but it really shines when you plug in a VO and trigger input, freeze the input, and play it like a spectral synthesizer. I would say that I use this in maybe 35% of my patches, and I would not trade it. I initially wanted to cap off this video by just leaving the camera on for 10 minutes while making a patch, but I would rather you use your imagination, and I would rather do patching in my next live stream, or alternatively, you could go back through my older videos where I have plenty of modular patches. Or alternatively, you could listen to the last few albums I released as the Flashbulb, where most of the synth stuff is happening in this very modular environment. What do you think? Do you think there's modules in here that I'm not using to their full potential and that I should probably look into a bit more? Or do you think that there's modules I should buy to add to this to make other modules even more powerful? If you do think that, let me know in the comments. Speaking of asking me questions, if you want to ask me questions and have me respond to them live, you can watch my weekly stream, which is something I'm doing now. And that is thanks to my Patreon, where you can watch all of my previous streams. You can download a bunch of the music that I use in the background of this channel and other unreleased tracks. You can download assets like reactor patches and samples and etc. And there's a really rad Discord community, and it keeps growing, and it's a really fun thing. And speaking of Patreon, here are my top tier patrons, and I want to thank them very gently. Okay, that was a little weird. Was that weird? Yeah, that was weird. Bye.